of research outputs on South Africa's skills development ecosystem to prepare for the future of the green hydrogen economy. To perhaps start by giving you the running order of today's events, we will hear welcoming remarks by Phumla Hlati, followed by an introduction of the topic by Dr. Dion Kluter. We'll have a presentation of the policy briefs by Francois Pretorius, researcher at SIRE, as well as Letitia Gentle, Senior Program Manager and Researcher, who will then facilitate a discussion with our esteemed panelist, which leads us then to the next segment of the discussion, which is the Q&A session. And we invite especially those who are joining us online to start sharing the comments and questions on the chat function to facilitate us being able to bring that into the room during the Q&A session and the facilitated discussion by Dion. And without further ado, I'd hand over the floor to Phumla Hlati.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this on? Yeah, it's on. All right. As already introduced, my name is Phumla Hlati. I'm with the United Nations Development Program in South Africa, and I head up our work on inclusive growth. For this work, we are doing it jointly with GIZ in South Africa, and we're quite pleased to have you all here and to those joining us online as well. So just some quick remarks on my side. For 5 minutes, which has been allocated to me. First of all, in terms of why we're involved in this space as the United Nations Development Program in South Africa. So we're implementing an initiative to support government and its people around advancing inclusive just energy transition in South Africa. This work has 3 main elements to it. The first one centers around supporting innovation in the country on specifically the area of just energy transition. So in that space, we're supporting entrepreneurs with, first of all, identifying innovative ideas and interventions in that area, but also taking it to scale in terms of providing focused support on those ideas. We are also supporting capacity development, which is where this work that we're doing together with SIRE falls squarely. So we work together with GIZ and other partners on supporting skills development in TVET colleges, but also there's a component of research, which is why we're here today. The third area focuses on a number of things, but essentially around social dialogue in the area of just energy transition in South Africa. And within that space, then we are supporting the PCC, the Presidential Climate Commission, firstly with research, but also with policy dialogues, but we've also taken it to the grassroots level. So in a nutshell, I'm making the point that within UNDP South Africa, we've got quite a huge focus around how we organize ourselves as a development partner in terms of supporting the country. But also, and quite interestingly for us at a global level is that if you go to our website, you'll realize that UNDP has quite a massive focus on just foresight as a way of thinking and approaching development around the Sustainable Development Goals, but also around development generally. So we work in a number of countries, and we've supported quite a number of initiatives just looking at foresight and looking at the future in that manner. So this is why we're so pleased with the work that SIRE has done for us in South Africa. It's not the first product that we've done around introducing or having the skills foresight or foresight thinking as an inherent part of designing interventions. We've done work in the Eastern Cape for the Office of the Premier as well in terms of looking at development in that area. Thirdly, and lastly, the point that I want to make is that green hydrogen generally is an area that we know that government, the private sector, development partners, and many other stakeholders are looking at quite strategically as an area of potential for growth and opportunity for that matter in the country. And so even for us, it's an area supported by the government of Japan in this work that we've been looking at, and we've been doing quite a number of things in that specific area as well with the university, or with the Northwest University rather, and also working with the private sector, with Toyota, you know, just looking at skills development, but also looking at what this means for policy in the country. So in a nutshell, we're very pleased with the work, therefore, that is being presented today. We will hear all about it. And indeed, we're very grateful to the support and partnership that we have with GIZ in this work, but also the funding support that we've received from the government of Japan. So mine is not really to talk about what the research is all about, how it was conducted, but it is just to welcome you all and to contextualize the work that we've done here. So thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
We've just heard welcoming remarks from Phumla Hlati, Portfolio Head of Inclusive Growth at the United Nations Development Programme. In her welcoming remarks, she highlights three components in the work which they undertake. One, working with entrepreneurs, the second one on capacity development, which encompasses skills development and research, and the third component being social dialogue on the just energy transition in South Africa. Thank you so much, Phumla, for that welcoming. We'll now hear from Dr. Dion Kluter, who's the head of the Futures Program at SAIA, to contextualize this conversation about the green hydrogen economy and skills development in South Africa. And he will probably do that in about 20 minutes. Dion, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. Thank you so much, Phumla. Thank you to the UNDP, the partners, GIZ, SECO, as well as the people of Japan. We appreciate that you reached out to us to do this collaborative project. We really think and see this as an initial step towards doing more of this type of work, working very in a collaborative and participatory fashion with all kind of wide variety of stakeholders. So just to, again, acknowledge the partners and then as well, bring you to why are we here today. We wanted to present to you the project. The project was, and the aim of the project was about reimagining and co-exploring skills foresight for the green hydrogen economy to enhance TVET skills industry linkages, and as well as build anticipatory governance by employing participatory foresight methods in our research approach. So we started the project about 7 months ago, and we had key aims, objectives of the work was to co-create policy recommendations that would be implementable, as well as enhancing futures literacy. That means really understanding how to work with the future, imagining and anticipating key trends and themes about the future, as well as finding systemic innovations, and then bringing all of this together in terms of how we can govern a new TVET ecosystem towards supporting the work on the green hydrogen economy. So as I said, the wide variety of stakeholders were involved. We had the TVET ecosystem members, which mainly meant a lot of government stakeholders, higher education and training. We had the EWCETA, we had the HRDC, we had Treasury, we had a wide variety of government, civil society, academia, intergovernmental organizations, as well as the private sector. We had a specific focus in our work was to create a whole series of activities that would really feed a different type and nuanced information to the work, to create this kind of collective intelligence of the dynamics at play in understanding how we can reimagine the future of skills development in South Africa, specifically towards green artisans and green skills development. So in the pre-workshop phase, we really started to have a series of interviews with key leaders in the field. That was followed up when we started the project with a 3-day workshop, which I'll expand on just now. then after that, we had a series of policy dialogues, virtual policy dialogues with over 20, 25 key experts involved in that, as well as advisory committee, which was like 7 one-on-one interviews with key experts as well. And all of that brings us to this moment. So in all, we have consulted over 60 different stakeholders in this project. So during the 3-day in-person workshop, which we call the Futures Literacy Lab, we had this a wonderful group of people from a broad variety of society, diverse stakeholders that we brought together, and they helped us work with what are the positive signs we can already see in the TVET system that we could, if they are seen as pockets of the future in the present and seen as positive change, can we work with how we mature them into something much more scaled, as well as much more influential, and then try to imagine how these interlinkages could then grow this type of small seed initiatives. And then we looked at the interlinkages, how they would affect different parts of the system. We looked at then also what is the systems that keeping us the business as usual in place. We listen to different voices, the voice of the incumbent, the voice of the manager. We listen to a wide variety of positions as well. But we also try to really establish what is the preferred future look like. What is the vision that we really see our stakeholders wants the TVET ecosystem to work towards? How can we really integrate new visions of feeding into the green ecosystems, but specifically the green hydrogen as a important energy carrier in South Africa's energy mix? Then moving along, we really spent a lot of the time on our engagement in getting to the deeper analysis of not only, superficial headline issues, but really going into what are the worldviews that's maybe keeping us behind? What are the myths and metaphors? What are the structures and systems actors that are there? So this is an example of how we did that, as well as in the last day, then we brought all of this together and had identified with the stakeholders specific key leverage points or systemic innovations that would help us push us towards the 2035 preferred future that was co-created in the group. From this work, we then really built and as I already explained, various engagements in processes into shaping that initial skeleton understanding into a much more fully fledged kind of ideas on policy innovations and policy suggestions that we develop. So why did we do all this? The value of strategic foresight in futures literacy is about better anticipation. It is really about identifying and preparing sooner rather than later for opportunities and challenges or threats, so that we can really work with the future in a sensible manner and a structured approach to the future. There's also the importance of policy innovation to spur new thinking, so that we can create the type of change that helps us to work with the future in such a way that you have contextually appropriate policies speaking to the trends of the future and the interventions that we have at play. As well as the final one is the future's readiness, is to really stress test the ideas that we have developed, but also propose a range of scenarios and stress test those ideas against the future's options. So having said all that, this type of approach really helps us getting to the position of how we can build futures literacy with key stakeholders, government, civil society, private sector, and then propose alternatives that are more systemic, but also more holistic in terms of going beyond traditional skills planning. So what do we mean by traditional skills planning? It's the traditional approach that mainly aims to predict through forecasting mechanisms the type of skills required and tries to build in the balancing act between demand and supply of these skills. What we propose in Skills Foresight is that we complement the skills planning approach with a structured approach to anticipating the future and to anticipating the skills needs to inform present day action, and to making the aim really clear on creating the systemic change required. Then to complement skills foresight, we have to also have skills anticipation, which is a complementary system that has this idea of building proactive responses to futures intelligence by means of experimentation and prototyping to develop proactive, ready-made policy options. So we have to find a form of gamification, if you might like, and experimentation to develop the prototypes that might speak in a contextually appropriate way to the issues at stake as they develop. So it's an adaptive and flexible approach of thinking about skills. Then lastly, skills governance, which brings this all together, is obviously developing institutional structures, processes, and channels to facilitate participatory stakeholder engagement and to co-create policy responses using the previous things like labor market intelligence, skills planning, skills foresight, and skills anticipation. So all of this might help us to get to a better future, to better have skills foresight in place, have people futures literate, but at the same time, this can only happen in a type of economy that would facilitate this type of approach. So what we propose with our work is that we should think holistically about the economy, because a lot of the talk and about skills planning tends to be about jobs alone. And we need to have the type of jobs that speaks to the economy. What we are proposing is economic well-being that goes beyond the traditional approaches to governance and policy making, where there's this over-reliance on prediction and certainty in the planning process, and then really adapt that to understanding that we are in an era of great acceleration of change, and that the scale of complexity needs to have different approaches to thinking both about the economy, but also how skills development can take place. So economic well-being depends on 4 forms of provisioning. And so the first is paid work. Obviously, this is where we need paid work, but at the same time, this holistic approach acknowledges household provisioning, caring for persons, the children at home, the elderly, the sick, people with disabilities. We need to have systems in place that help people then be able to enter the TVET system so that they can whether they're responsible for the elderly or children or sick, they can enter this type of system. While at the same time, we also have the provisioning of the commons, which is this idea that we only can live in where there's clean air, clean land, clean water. So we need a viable ecosystem. And then lastly, the provisioning of the state, which provides all the resources and infrastructural elements to support the previous 3. So economic well-being is not something that can be achieved either for individuals or states by thinking about jobs alone. And this is the key message we're trying to portray. So creating this type of conditions for dignified labor, care for material economy, caring for the local and global commons, but also human dignity and planetary flourishing. So getting to the policy recommendations and why we are here today. We are here to discuss firstly the one policy briefing titled Skills Foresight, Training in Uncertainty for Skills Foresight. And this one, we faced several challenges, or what we call opportunities as well, and we explored these with our stakeholders. So the current skills planning system, as we already mentioned, fails to accurately predict future labor market demands. So there clearly shows a misalignment, which in this balancing the short-term crises with long-term goals, and then you start risking the curriculum obsolescence and diminished student employability. So what we are proposing to address that first area of opportunity is to establish a Foresight capacitated team within the Department of Higher Education and Training to proactively identify potential future threats, opportunities, and create systemic change for developing green skills, specifically, obviously, then for the green hydrogen economy. This team should collaborate closely with the Just Transition Labor Research Center and complement existing labor market intelligence research. How are we going to fund this? We're going to fund this where we're proposing allocations from the National Skills Fund, while at the same time, we need to ensure that Skills Foresight and Insights can change initiatives that are publicly accessible and online on an online platform so that we can monitor this in the purview of the Presidential Climate Commission. Our second real area, and there are 4 policy dimensions that we tackled, was this idea that the TVET sector lacks innovative responses to uncoordinated interventions. There's this top-down dynamic or governance model. And in this type of system, which has extensive centralization of the curriculum, responses of, you struggle to have a responsive system. So participants expressed frustration with us within the sector's limited responsiveness. There's the incoherent kind of positions or unaligned approaches to rapid and contextual changes, and which risks a curriculum obsolescence and diminishing student employability. So what we are proposing here is that the DHET should provide futures literacy training for decision makers across the TVET ecosystem. We are really thinking that hosting collaborative workshops on strategic foresight, similar to these that we conducted, and on skills anticipation, would enable stakeholders to identify emerging skills needs and develop strategies for sectoral agility and systemic change. This initiative should be led by and proposed by the DHET Foresight task team mentioned earlier, encouraging iterative studies and experiments aimed at advanced green hydrogen related skills beyond the current curriculum. Then the third angle that we tackled was this idea that several challenges face the green hydrogen economy to be established in South Africa, and to ensure that we have a capable workforce. For this, we need to develop workforce resilience beyond potential the potential green hydrogen economy that requires transversal competencies, including digital proficiency, problem solving, initiative taking, autonomous learning, as well as cultural sensitivity, social acumen, and creativity, and not the last, but critical thinking as well. So from our point of view, those type of interventions might create the system that produces a more transversal approach to skills development. So the policy recommendation then stands that establishment of a cross-sectoral TVET advisory board for the green transversal skills development within the HRDC is proposed. And this type of board will oversee transversal skills development efforts, conduct resilience assessments of credentialing systems, as well as address barriers for marginalized individuals and establish a knowledge sharing platform between these stakeholders. So we see the leveraging of these insights then from DHET Foresight task team, that the board will breach this gap between the formal and informal transversal skills recognition and prioritizing practical learning experiences. What we saw in the work that is that a lot of the TVET system obviously focused to the formal sector, and a lot of people aren't within this formal sector, as we know in South Africa's economy, and developing some form of system that includes informal transversal skills recognitions might really be able to spur a lot of innovation and address some of the challenges faced in skills development. The last one that the Foresight paper tackled was this idea of the TVET qualifications. We had this perception of it's inferior to universities. It exacerbates issues such as low student throughput rates, and we have to develop new approaches to improve this type of recognition. So what we are proposing here is that the perception disparities between TVET qualifications should be addressed by promoting a new social compact for post-school education and training, PSET, the adoption of participatory futures, which is the approach that we used in this work, such as futures literacy labs, and that these labs should engage a wide range of stakeholders envisioning and shaping the future trajectory of the TVET ecosystem. And this work can be funded by the National Planning Commission and implemented by the Department of Science and Innovation, HRDC. These dialogues aim to foster collective problem solving and co-create transformative pathways for the TVET ecosystem. Then, having dealt with the first of our policy briefings, the second policy briefing drilled down into really getting to the skills governance dimensions. So within this paper, we really explored what are the current education systems, what current education systems overlook, the broader concept of economic well-being, focusing primarily on jobs alone, neglecting other essential provisions, which is the societal, the ecological, and then really the narrow focus then perpetuates economic disparities, and it fails to address the broader challenges in a holistic manner. So as we then would like to propose, establish a skills governance working group titled Leave No One Behind Project. This is an initiative that should be run from the presidency in collaboration with the Department of Higher Education and Training, and organizations like Business Unity South Africa or the National Business Initiative could support this type of work by with aims to investigate skills value chains aligned with the implementation of the 4 provisions as mentioned earlier of the economic well-being. Then this work, the Leave No One Behind campaign or project, could really incentivize the private sector to adoption of circular economy practices and developing legislation prioritizing the well-being of current and future generations that are recommended to support the economic well-being initiative. Then in terms of the second dynamic that we tackled was the challenge or opportunity that we also saw that despite the fact of incubators being present in the TVET college system, we need to really see how we can make them adaptable in regenerative learning ecosystems and as that actually promotes economic well-being. So from our work, we then, and through the collaborative efforts in working with our stakeholders, we proposed that expanding the scope of incubators would be a good idea within TVET colleges to become innovative hubs that are crucial to spur innovation. Examples of this could be the South African Renewable Business Incubator that already demonstrates successful models like this. And then the presidency should, in collaboration with the DHET and the business organizations like Business Unity South Africa and NBI, support the establishment of the Green Economy Skills Incubator hubs to ignite green hydrogen startup experimentation, foster skills anticipation, and advance the well-being economy within the TVET ecosystem. I'm wrapping up. There's my last 2 slides. The challenge that we unpacked here within the skills governance domain was about funding. Of course, funding is a key dimension. The funding allocated to TVET, while increasing, remains inadequate to meet the enrollment targets. We have a vast variety of unemployed youth in South Africa. If we were to address it, we need to tackle funding issues as sector transitions to this new paradigm of economic well-being and systemic interconnectedness. We really need to foster sustainable, innovative funding strategies. So what we proposed here was to adopt sustainable and innovative financing models that align with the principles of economic well-being, and that private investments can be leveraged to fund social programs through mechanisms like social impact bonds, tying investors' returns to predefined social outcomes. There's also another funding mechanism could be to attract TVET students to these financing mechanisms, and finding partnerships between educational institutions, industry stakeholders, and government agencies, which should be fostered to incorporate environmental sustainable principles. And then lastly, budgetary allocations should be realigned with broader measures of success beyond just GDP, and National Treasury should encourage this adoption through financing strategies. There we go.
Okay, cool. Sorry, slides got confused there. Hi, everybody. I'm Francois Pretorius, and yeah, this is my first SIA baby, so I'm very excited to welcome you all here. Just going to quickly jump back before we go into a question and answer session, just with our very super bright colleagues here who are going to be answering some of our questions. Quickly going to jump back to just skills foresight in terms of our key findings there. Let me just get there. Okay, so just a quick recap before we go into the questions. As we said, just basically first challenge that came up and was very clear in the room, and Devaksha, who we are going to speak to now, was in the room as well, so she can speak to it. But basically what happened is there's this tension between short-termism and long-termism, which has become very, very clear in terms of we need to essentially respond to what is happening in the world now, but also curriculum development takes a while to actually, there's just a gap between it. Essentially, this misalignment does pose challenges with something like the green hydrogen economy, for instance, which is fast developing at this stage, but we still don't know which skills will be needed, essentially. So with that, there is this idea of, okay, fine, let's find a balance between the two. And essentially, even though the system is doing a lot to address this problem, it is just struggling. And it's not just a South African thing, it's a global thing, but we are speaking specifically to South Africa at this stage. So with that in mind, we just said, as we are foresight practitioners, this is our field of expertise. As soon as you start looking towards the long-term futures, specifically with the idea of plural futures in terms of whatever decision we make today, we've got a lot of different options available to us. If we start looking at it with regards to that idea in mind, and we essentially say, listen, Department of Higher Education and Training, let's start looking at future threats and opportunities, not just respond to what's happening in the system, because that seems to be specifically in the working group, that was sort of the general frustration that was felt. With that, the idea is we should collaborate closely with the Just Transition Labour Research Centre, which Boitumelo is joining us online. She made us aware of, and it's a really, really good initiative just from the trade unions who are looking at all of this. And it should complement existing labour market intelligence research. There's really good work being done by the HSRC, etc. The system is there, but we're saying, let's look at threats and opportunities and just complement it essentially. Then with that, seeing as the NSF, the National Skills Fund, is already funding this really good work being done by the HSRC, etc., a little bit of money can go towards funding essentially a foresight team within the DHET to look at threats and opportunities, but also that is null and void if people can't access it. So we're saying, listen, PCC is already, they're doing a really great job. Let's slot in with them that they can build something on their platform online where people can look at what is the DHET looking at in terms of long-term threats and opportunities, and they can just access them. And then policy, sort of people working in policy like ourselves in terms of researchers, etc., can very easily access what is the DHET saying about long-term future planning. So then just the second threat and opportunity that is basically that came up very clearly in the room as well is this idea that the TVET sector lacks innovation. It came up in every working group. We had 4 of them, and it was the strangest thing in terms of collating the research. Just it was this idea of it's a very top-down governance structure at this stage, and there's not really anything happening in terms of innovation. Problem with that is it's very easy to say, okay, fine, let's change the structure altogether. Let's essentially make it from the bottom up. But it's that way for a reason in terms of there needs to be curriculum oversight. There needs to be the QCTO is doing a really good job in terms of essentially ensuring that standards are met. So you can't say, listen, let's just decentralize everything. Also, we were working on a 6-month, 7-month project, so it's a little bit out of our remit to say, listen, this is the best way to do it. But what became very clear with this is to essentially say, listen, there's also this idea of people need to start thinking longer term. One of the key elements that came through very clearly, the OECD speaks about this, then there's Vedekant who spoke about it in terms of his research, which is this idea that essentially, let's keep the DHET in control of working with the curriculums, but then at TVET level, create space for iteration, for playing around a little bit with auxiliary sort of knowledge building and responding geographically, contextually, what's actually happening on the floor. Or in the field, rather. So if you want to do that, we're saying, listen, we need to get everyone in the system to be thinking long-term. So essentially, you need to really focus then on getting the actual TVET lecturers, the people who are working on the ground, get them capacitated to be able to start planning long-term. With that, we're saying this DHET Foresight task team that we spoke about, why don't we just get them to essentially spearhead this initiative and drive it through the whole TVET system in terms of basic futures literacy? We are not advocating that everybody should be a foresight practitioner, because then I wouldn't have a job either, but also just essentially to get people to think a little bit longer term and to build this capacity that Dion spoke to earlier in terms of skills anticipation, in terms of iterative learning, in terms of design thinking, in terms of let's try new things at the ground level, not spend crazy amounts of money on it, but see what works, feed it up into the chain, and then see what works with the curriculum development. Then just in terms of the third challenge that came through very clearly as well is this idea that green hydrogen, we're putting a lot of eggs in one basket, which is all good and well, but there's a lot counting against us as well. I'm not going to go into all of it, but I mean, geographic location, etc. It's not going to be an easy road for South Africa to become a green hydrogen leader, essentially. So we're saying, listen, we are planning for green hydrogen, but if that doesn't come to fruition in the idealized way in terms of hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of rands rolling in, we need to still capacitate people to work in the green skills environment. And with that, it's this idea of transversal skills competencies. A lot has been said with regards to it previously, but we're reiterating this idea of people need to be able to work in green skills, but work across a bevy of different directions. At this stage, there's amazing work being done by the CETAs, etc., specifically for green hydrogen, which is great. But we're just saying, listen, we need to be aware of the fact that there's always transversal skills needed as well, and long-term transversal skills. we don't know what the future is going to hold, but if we capacitate people now to be resilient and adaptable, you are essentially taking care of that. So again, we're saying here, let's leverage the insights from the DHET Foresight task team, which is going to be presented on the PCC webpage if everything goes well. This will then bridge the gap between formal and informal transversal skills recognition. And then in this way, we will prioritize practical learning experiences. So then the last one is just, and this in the room, people were very frustrated and very vocal about it, essentially, that TVET is seen as the fallback for people who can't go to university, to other institutions. And we had TVET students in the room. We had a lot of people working in the TVET sector as well. And they were just really, really irritated by that. And while the initial thing immediately that people spoke about is this idea of let's market the TVET sector better, that doesn't get to like the underlying nitty-gritty of why do we believe TVET is inferior. So with that, there's really interesting work being done the world over, just in terms of new social compacts for different areas. So South Africa, we're speaking about a new social compact for the country. Every year with the State of the Nation, it gets pushed out by a year. But essentially, we are saying, let's call for a new social compact specifically for the post-school education and training sector. UNESCO has got an amazing paper on this, which just shows that if you can get the buy-in of as many people as possible, there is real change in the system. We drew on quite an interesting initiative that happened in North Macedonia, of all places, and it was a UNDP initiative where they called it Dream Labs. And they essentially had, I think, close to 200 of these labs set up all over the country, and they had thousands of people go in and record their dreams for the country. They didn't limit it to education. They had it on quite a few different topics, essentially. But the idea was then, okay, what we're saying here is do something similar, but do it on all of the education sort of facilities in South Africa, but specifically on the TVET campuses, and get people to dream about a better TVET sector, but do it in a structured manner as well. So there would be prompts, etc. And this is where we would get the Department of Science and Innovation involved, because they've got a very good track record of sort of doing this type of thing. And we can set up cameras all over the country. We can start recording students, and we can actually get people on the ground. What it doesn't say in the slide is we would ideally get CETAs to drive this as well, because they do have a presence on all of the different campuses, and then we can do it that way and just make people aware of actually the power that lies in all of this. So that's just sort of going a little bit more in depth in terms of what Dion spoke about. Letitia is going to take you through skills governance, and then we're going to pose our questions to our highly esteemed panelists, and I am very interested to hear what they have to say. So thanks so much, guys.
Good afternoon to all our attendees, be it in person or online. I hope that the outcome of this research project will provide new perspectives and outcomes to the very important topic of skills governance and industry linkages in the TVET ecosystem and emerging green hydrogen economy. This part of the research focuses on systemic innovations for the emerging green hydrogen economy. We are all aware of the challenges facing South Africa, especially those linked to inequality, climate change, and persistent unemployment. To address these systemic challenges, we often look to education to somehow close a gap and create better post-school outcomes. I need to say that while conducting this research, the great strides in education sector must be acknowledged and commended. But let's draw our focus to TVET, which is the technical and vocational education training sector, and the employability or employment options for TVET graduates in the South African context. Very aspirational targets have been placed on the TVET sector, which includes training 30,000 artisans by 2030 to meet the industry demands, while combating unemployment in light of the just energy transition. These converging factors, such as the just energy transition, high demand for skilled artisans, challenges in the TVET ecosystem, high inflation, rising unemployment, and inequality, demands a new paradigm. Our research if you're like me, you're always looking for the next app to lose weight. And then you download that app, and now have got different options. So skills governance is not an app that you download. It is more of the operating platform like iOS or Android, which forms the platform impacting all skills planning activities. The core focus of this research is about expanding our framework and our assumptions to move beyond job attainment and to transition to holistic education outcomes, which includes dignified work, household care, viable environmental ecosystems, and state infrastructural support. By implication, this paradigm shift from education for jobs to whole person and societal well-being for local and planetary flourishing. The emergence of the green hydrogen economy is a promising avenue in South Africa's energy transition, underscored by its prominent inclusion in pivotal government planning documents, and those are freely listed. We approach this complex task by applying futures research methods, which is focused on one, what actions am I taking today to impact and create better outcomes? And two, what future do I want? I always ask myself this, do I want my parents' future or do I want my own future? And what am I working towards? So our focus in long term is in the long term, and we targeted 2035, as Dion mentioned earlier. So while we applied futures research methods, we do not predict the future. Based on the research outcomes, we identify specific pathways which can change the current trajectory towards more inclusive and prosperous outcomes. Another disclaimer is that we are also not into the business of forecasting and projecting POP futures, which is a fancy term for promoting investments in emerging technologies. How to spot POP futures is to use technology to solve complex problems. So we are also not into that. So now that I've specified what we are not into, let me talk about what we actually did. So skills governance defines a departure from linear planning processes. I'm sure you've had some goals and you start and you plan, and then if I do this, I move on to that, and I move on to that. So we're saying we need to move through the process and tick little boxes as we go along. But we know that in the complex world in which we find ourselves, makes it very hard and, in all honesty, sometimes impractical to adhere to linear planning models. Only to realize that when you complete your process, your neat little process, the outcome is different to what you had intended, leading to sometimes skills mismatches and inadequate labor absorption rates, giving rise to other unintended consequences, such as rising unemployment and inequality. So skills governance impacts all stakeholders in multiple ways, creating outcomes that skirt on the periphery of what is possible. It creates the space for collaboration and innovative strategies to emerge, offering pathways to address pressing challenges and harness opportunities for South Africa's transition towards the green hydrogen economy. I'll be addressing 4 key policy recommendations with you. The first one is about skills governance for economic well-being, which is to leave no one behind. So in this policy recommendation, we emphasize the argument eloquently placed by Kerry Pacer, which is what sort of education will enable young people to create long-term economic well-being for themselves, their families, and their communities. We focus on economic well-being and explain it as the personal and collective ability to mobilize economic, social, and material resources to achieve personal and collective well-being. Achieving meaningful educational inclusion demands a departure from solely prioritizing jobs towards embracing a more comprehensive understanding and broader conceptualization of economic well-being. In other words, we need to look beyond formal employment. Implementing skills governance practices empowers all stakeholders in the TVET ecosystem to generate, circulate, and retain wealth locally while safeguarding and investing in the natural environment. This is because the well-being economy is designed to prioritize the well-being of people and the planet, delivering social justice within the framework of environmental sustainability. This approach is about ensuring fair access to meaningful work, supports reasonable business practices, reduces inequality, and enhances citizens' lives through a human rights-based social and climate justice approach. The TVET ecosystem operates within the confines of a current hegemonic economic paradigm, a system that prioritizes paid work for employment over the other three forms of provisioning. We advocate for an integrated well-being indicators to offer a more comprehensive framework for holistic well-being, transcending education for jobs alone. Our reality is that income inequality in South Africa is racialized, gendered, and spatialized. The adoption of the well-being economy in the green hydrogen sector holds transformative potential if implemented by national and local governments. This shift to a well-being economy prioritizes the well-being of people over solely maximizing economic output, aligning with sustainability, social responsibility, and environmental stewardship principles. The second policy recommendation is about reframing the TVET value net. So we've looked at all the different stakeholders within the TVET ecosystem, and you'll probably find it if you page through the policy brief. It is a very holistic map of all the different stakeholders and how they interact. And we say that by contextualizing the TVET value net within the framework of a well-being economy, holistic approaches and systemic innovations emerge, unlocking previously untapped value. So it's beyond linear tick boxes, but moving to more holistic relationships with stakeholders within the ecosystem. Integrating the provisioning of the commons for viable ecosystems in the TVET value net facilitates this holistic approach, such as the well-being economy, creating new demands for skills, and exploring the interconnections and linkages among stakeholders offers the potential for expanded state provisioning, including education outcomes, infrastructure skills needs, energy transitions, and public procurement linked to these provisions to ensure more equitable distribution of resources. As John mentioned earlier, incubators, also known as innovation hubs, play a crucial role in exploring new educational system approaches, such as artificial intelligence and understanding the impact on current and future work dynamics. Incubators focus on practical knowledge and experimentation, aiming to contribute to the well-being economy by defending and caring for local and global commons. Experimentation, prototypes, and new forms of learning generated in incubators serve as a platform to reshape and revolutionize the current TVET curriculum into an adaptable and regenerative learning ecosystem. This approach facilitates better connections with the private sector, fosters the creation of new markets, and discovers new value chains to promote economic well-being. In the policy brief, we make specific mention to Plug and Play, which is also a very advanced incubator hub. And if you're interested, I really suggest that you have a look at what they do, especially in Europe. The third policy brief is about rethinking TVET funding strategies for improved social and ecological impact. For emerging sectors such as the green hydrogen economy, sustainable and innovative financial strategies to promote long-term sustainability will be required. To illustrate, independent power providers are spearheading the renewable energy transition and taking up new roles as development partners. The public sector can bolster this transition by stimulating market demand in other sectors such as transport, which is a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Supporting such initiatives presents opportunities for the public sector to promote green hydrogen in public transport such as railways and commuter transport. Other examples include the adoption of green hydrogen generators for heavy industry users to alleviate electricity supply shortages. By stimulating market demand through expanding the use of green hydrogen, a greater focus is placed on skills development, enabling both the private and public sectors to aggregate resources and leverage green hydrogen skills across various subsectors. So by adopting principles of the wellbeing economy, innovative finance models can be assessed and not only focus on delivering equitable returns on investment, but also geared towards social and environmental impacts. Examples include private investments, which can be utilized to fund social programs designed to support the commons through the implementation of social impact bonds. And investor returns are contingent upon the program's success in achieving predefined social outcomes. Other examples include the Green Outcomes Fund in South Africa, which has been set up to support green, sustainable, and small businesses, and has already attracted a significant amount of capital for redistribution. Attracting TVET students and graduates to innovative financing initiatives linked to social and environmental impacts opens new pathways towards entrepreneurship within the emerging green hydrogen economy. More focus is required to transition towards a well-being orientated budget that tracks progress within broader measures of success relative to narrow indices such as GDP or student throughput. For example, a redesign of budget documentation is needed to better understand how any policy, project, or initiative contributed to improvements in well-being. And note, I did not say to improvements in growth, but to improvements in well-being. This approach will require democratic methods to assess whether public provisions align with public well-being, priorities, and values. In addition, it is necessary to move beyond cost-benefit analysis, as policy should be assessed in terms of their contribution to current and future well-being by implementing multiple criteria and value-based assessments, such as racial equity tools, to better understand their impact. My final policy recommendation, which can be a bit political, but it depends on your lens or how you perceive it to be, which is the universal basic dividend, not universal basic income, but universal basic dividend, which is to leverage the green hydrogen wealth redistribution for a just energy transition. So South Africa is proactively navigating towards a more inclusive and equitable energy transition, as evidenced in the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, which underscores the imperative to safeguard livelihoods and address social imbalances. However, the nation's economic landscape presents a myriad of challenges, highlighting the high unemployment, pervasive inequality, entrenched poverty, and structural constraints. So against this backdrop, the burgeoning social demands for government support, coupled with economic adversities, threaten to strain public finances. And in response to these complexities, we advocate a complementary approach, particularly in the context of the energy transition, by embracing the principles of the well-being economy and integrating a universal basic dividend. The well-being economy posits that effective provisioning by the state is essential to ensure the availability of infrastructure resources that support various facets of societal well-being. The UBD approach serves as a safety net to foster more inclusive policies and outcomes, particularly amid prevailing land ownership and energy security dynamics, which we find ourselves in. Amid the inevitable transition towards the green hydrogen economy, the demand for common resources such as land and water will undoubtedly intensify. However, given the stagnant progress concerning land ownership, both for commercial and personal benefit, which remains unequally distributed. Property owners, both private and commercial, benefit significantly from installing solar panels and marketing their surplus energy supplies, putting them in an advantageous position over those without property or financial means for such investments. So this disparity in access to renewable energy raises benefits concerned about policies that perpetuate energy inequality, favoring a select few in the private sector through land ownership and rent-seeking activities, rather than promoting energy democracy. The intricate interplay between land ownership and the equitable distribution of the provisioning of the commons for a viable ecological ecosystem, such as clean soil, air, and water, with specific reference to the green hydrogen value chains, necessitates exploiting alternative economic approaches. The intersection of land ownership and energy security, interlinked with the challenges posed by climate change, underscores the necessity for a more progressive economic approach, as exemplified by the concept of universal basic dividend and its potential synergy with the well-being economy. It's proposed and aims to distribute dividends to all members of society, irrespective of their socioeconomic status or employment status. It can provide a fixed income to individuals regardless of other income sources. The adoption of the UBD recognizes that certain resources that are commonly owned should benefit everyone in society. This entails recognizing the intrinsic value of common resources such as water and land, while integrating public investment into the prevailing capitalist framework. So by harnessing the value generated from the commons, the UBD seeks to ensure that everyone receives a fair share of the wealth generated. And this approach aligns with principles of the well-being economy to support economic justice, reduce inequality, and promote a sense of shared ownership and responsibility by providing a source of income that is not dependent on market participation. By linking the distribution of dividends to the use of common resources for energy generation, the UBD incentivizes sustainable and equitable resource management practice. In conclusion, the journey towards the green hydrogen economy in South Africa necessitates a comprehensive overhaul of the TVET ecosystem. This policy brief underscores the critical role of skills governance in navigating this transition, emphasizing the need for inclusive approaches that prioritize economic well-being, address historical injustices, and foster sustainability. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Hello, everybody, and I'm back. And I'm pretty certain everybody has heard enough from the SIA team at this stage. So I'm going to be introducing just every speaker as we go along. The first speaker who we invited is Devaksha, who is, we loved her in the workshop. She is super interesting. And please plug the wonderful work that you're doing in terms of skills development as well. With that, she heads up Ikigai Engineering, and she is our private sector voice in the room today. Essentially, we've drafted some questions just based on what we presented now. Letitia and I will ask a question each. You have time to respond. We want to hear from you. If there's time, we might ask a third question and throw it in there. So maybe a bit of a curveball, but hopefully not. And with that, I'm just going to start with the first one, which is what I spoke to last, is this idea of society viewing TVET as lesser than, basically. In your opinion, what strategies can the private sector employ to improve societal recognition of TVET qualifications and then just enhance the status of vocational training in South Africa as advocated by my brief?
Good afternoon, everybody. Francois, thanks for that introduction. So coming from a university background, yes, there is this perception that the TVET college qualification is inferior, but having the knowledge base of academics and the people that actually do the work, how can we actually think in that manner? So personally, we've embarked on working with a few financial institutions and partners and going to the TVET colleges and performing like about 2 or 3 months of training with them, hands-on training. And you find the odd students that doesn't pay attention, yes, but the rest of them are very on par with exactly what is happening in the country. So it actually makes us feel quite embarrassed to make that statement. And we found that in the last 2 years that image needs to change in the private sector drastically. So coming from that background, we don't have enough leverage, but a program like this would. To give the TVET college more exposure and the knowledge base that comes out of that, a fighting chance in the private sector. At the end of the day, the students that come out of that are the students that are going to do the work. So why are we neglecting them and creating this perception of the inferiority of their qualifications? But that being said, we have also found that the standard of the education is not to what we need it to be. And that is what has stopped private sector from going out there and bringing these students in on internships. Or the last time we spoke, we said the internships were going really well, but it nosedived after that. And that is because our utility has now been providing quality power. And the program that we would is in the solar interventions. And now private sector is saying we don't need the students anymore. So we've got to, it was a bit of a twist since we last spoke, but we've got to now start thinking, okay, but where else can we use their skills? Because remember, adding solar is not just an alleviation of load shedding, it's climate change initiative. And that education and trying to put yourself out there as that is lacking in industry. People are not looking at it that way. So private sector needs to really consider what they want and how they want to market themselves in order to attract these students to them.
See, and that's why I love you, because you speak to skills foresight essentially, and you speak to transversal skills with your answers. So it takes care of both. I'm going to hand you over to Letitia to just ask her a question, and then we take it from there.
Thank you, Francois. So the next question is, what do you believe are the benefits of establishing skills governance frameworks to oversee TVET and industry linkages, particularly as we prepare for the emerging green hydrogen economy?
Okay, so I think, hello, that everything you've said so far is on par, and that governance is required so that everybody's on the same page. You know, that's basically it. And at this stage, that's not what's happening. Everybody's working in silos. The CETAs themselves are working in silos and trying to show up as who's being better than that. And the governance then would then form a basis of this is where we're at and this is where we want to go towards. Now, since we've spoken, there've been a number of other initiatives that I've been involved in, particularly one with the World Bank, where they're now trying to create a common platform of how do we approach this just energy transition? So not necessarily on hydrogen, but in all aspects, and what are we going to put forward to the likes of our government and the stakeholders to make sure that we all on the same page and that we all are doing something and not trying to work against each other. So that governance is essential to, and the same with to involve public and private sector to make sure that we're all speaking the same language. So that essentially is a good start by creating these policies to make sure that we are now working towards a common goal.
So by reiterate what you've just said, it's about this whole change in paradigm.
Yeah.
So, and that's also part of Foresight is if you keep on doing the same thing, you'll end up probably with the same result. And this change of paradigm in terms of skills governance, what you say is definitely needed, especially within the private sector.
Yeah, no, definitely. If I go back to what I mentioned just now, if what's happened in the renewable energy, specifically the solar game, we can't have a situation like that. We can't be training skills and they're sitting and not talking to each other. So the intervention of private sector and what skills are required and how it's going to move us forward, and it needs to be there has to be definitely foresight involved in that. We can't be sitting in a situation of, oh, we've trained and now they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So just to add to that, I sit on a number of accreditation panels with the Engineering Council of South Africa, and they have now embarked on looking at the curriculum for TVET colleges. So we sit with technicons and universities at this stage and assessing what their programs are and how they look, and what does industry need. So there's a conversation there, but they haven't done one for TVET colleges. So they're embarking on now trying to pursue that accreditation so that all the TVET colleges are now offering the same thing. And if you're not, then you lose your accreditation. So that's actually quite a very important thing. And they're now recognizing that the skills are just as important from a TVET colleges as it is from your academic institutions like universities.
Great. That sounds very promising. Last question from me, Devaksha, is how can the principles of the well-being economy be integrated into innovative finance models to ensure that they deliver equitable returns on investment while simultaneously achieving significant social and environmental impacts?
Okay, so finance is always a tough one, right? But there's a number of interventions. As I mentioned, the World Bank is also looking into these things. And what I've seen is that our banking institutes have taken an active role in terms of providing finances for interventions like this. I mean, the current program we're working with, there's one of the banks that's involved in that. So leveraging off those institutions, the DBSA, IDC, there's a number of pockets of finances that can be tapped into. From the private sector side, I've known of a few organizations since the last time we spoke as well. I've met a few of them along the way that are purely investing in this hydrogen space as well and for the development of that. The frustrations is obviously the standard of education of TVET, but they then are prepared to put the finance down to train the students at any level. So one particular company has actually linked up an intern, so a TVET college students, with someone from academia, so an MSc student. And that's actually a pretty nice way of putting it together. So you're getting the both sides of the education levels and that interaction between them. So if we could get similar sort of programs, the financing, and that's where it comes in, the institutes that are financing wants to see where this is going. And this is why this is important, is they don't want to put their funds into something that's going to fall flat at the end of it. So making sure that these policies are in place and making sure that we're all on the same page to all the questions we've answered already is important so that there is pockets of finance that's available for that. So
Okay. Thanks so much, Devaksha.
Thank you. And we are actually, Boitumelo from Kusatu is joining us online. So Boitumelo has been super kind in terms of she did an interview with us. She pointed me to so much interesting facets that is included in the research as well. With that, I just want to know, can Boitumelo see us, David?
Yes, I can see the room. Sorry, Francois, I've lost audio, so I'm unable to hear you, but I can see you speaking.
Hear anything now? Let me just see quickly.
Yes, sort of.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Ooh, sorry. Is that okay? Perfect. So the first question that I want to ask is just in terms of, sorry, I want to quickly get to the right question before I ask you the incorrect question, which was meant for our last speaker, Mr. Spencer January. The question that I wanted to ask is just in terms of, given the challenges posed by the green hydrogen economy and the need for transversal skills, as I spoke to earlier, how, in your opinion, can COSATU contribute, or labor in general, contribute to developing these skills, both formally and informally, for workers?
Sure. Thank you, Francois, and thank you for the invites. Congratulations to you guys on paper well researched. We are also I'm actually looking forward to sharing it with the rest of COSATU membership. I think how we can do this is firstly identifying that the green hydrogen space is not universally new, understanding that there is current workforce in green hydrogen, and we need to make considerations for that. The most important thing that has been coming out of the discussions we're having and the discourse for organized labor in relation to green skills, in relation to the just transition and the future of work, is actually being able to understand the dynamic first. So a lot of research is important. Sorry, Francois, is everything okay in the room?
Sorry, yes, it is. Sorry, can you still see me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good.
So basically, we believe in a lot of investing in research, and that is why I was also open to being interviewed for your position papers. Beyond research, I think what organized labor can do is actually prepare the labor force. Workers on the ground at times are not able to interpret the big language that we speak when we speak about various technologies, when we speak about the transition, when we also speak about impacts of climate change and processes of the UNFCCC, they are unable to interpret that. So being able to simplify language for workers so that they're able to sufficiently engage with the material, but also sufficiently be able to translate it into their workplaces, translate it into their career trajectory. So a lot of research, a lot of preparing of workers, and preparedness of workers does not mean that workers will be able to participate in that green hydrogen sector, but it means that they'd be able to discern if it's a career trajectory they'd like to take or not. And if not, I think the latter part of your later part of your questions will be addressed in that. Preparedness, skill, and research is quite important to ensure that workers are incorporated and they're part of the discussion on a level that they're able to understand and engage.
Thank you so much. That is such a good answer, just in terms of it speaks to, I can clearly see you've read our research. So it does tie in with that. And yeah, it just essentially informs it in terms of what we speak to about transversal skills and also keeping the language as simple as possible, basically. So thank you so, so much for that. I'm going to hand you over to Letitia, but I just want to check quickly. David from our IT team is just sorting out quick technical glitch, basically. So just bear with me.
Hi, Botemelo. The second question is about the intersection of land ownership and energy security, interlinked with the challenges posed by climate change, underscores the necessity for a more progressive economic approach. One of our policy recommendations is the concept of universal basic dividends. In your opinion, why do you think UBD should be considered?
Thank you for that question. And I remember when we had our interview, I referred to a universal basic income grant, and you were quite specific in the differences between the two.
Well, in principle, definitely the organization I represent, Congress of South African Trade Unions, is really in principle looking to align with that. We speak of a just transition in the agricultural sector, and that's where we try to address the issue and the question of land redistribution, access to land and ownership. So there's a chapter on our COSATU blueprint for workers that speaks specifically to the redistribution of land and the principles in which the universal basic income dividend speaks to. I mean, we also kind of speak the same language as we address the issue of land and accessibility to land and how the impacts of climate change actually interfere with land ownership and the displacement of workers and communities. It's very important to note that COSATU speaks to an eco-socialist state where we all share the resources, whether it be ownership in renewable energy, technologies, or just knowing that you're able to participate in the low carbon economy with a footing that will allow you to participate from capital and etc. So we strongly believe in that this position is one that we need to further engage and indulge and be able to incorporate it into our current understanding of a universal basic income grant. I think linking the two and seeing how we need to basically have a holistic approach when it comes to basic income, when it comes to social protection, when it comes to just basic necessities of people to be able to survive in a world that is so ridden by impacts of climate change, and people are actually left to destitute if the correct policies are not put in place, if we're not even making consideration of how the day-to-day living of people on the ground is, whether it's from a perspective of townships or informal sectors. The issue of land is one that is going to always be a key issue for South Africans, and I think basic and most importantly for Black South Africans. So this is something that I think I want to explore further in the work of COSATU through the COSATU Climate Change Committee, through the COSATU Central Executive Committee, as well as the national office bearers, not only of COSATU, but those of the affiliates that we're looking to find them organized in renewable energy. I think the National Union of Mine Workers is going to be important to also understand what this means and how this can be a safety net for workers, basically, in the long run. And I think when I speak, I don't only speak for or on behalf of workers, but also for communities, because workers are parts of communities and are affected by the overall adversities that communities face.
Thank you so much, Boitumelo. That was so well answered. I'll hand you over to Francois.
Just wanted to thank you again, Boitumelo, as well spoken as always, and thank you so much for your key insights. We're actually going to move on, David, just to Spencer, who is in the room. So thank you so much, Boitumelo, for your time. We really, really appreciate it. Then lastly, we have Mr. Spencer January, who is from National Treasury. And again, we had an interview with him where in an hour's time, he changed our minds completely in terms of where the research was sitting and where it ended up. You'll hear him speak now, but he is just so knowledgeable and so insightful. And yeah, essentially with that, I am going to ask my first question. And then again, as per usual, I'm going to hand over to Letitia. My question is, how can National Treasury support the development of transversal skills commons, which I spoke to in my policy briefing, to ensure that workforce resilience beyond the immediate challenges of establishing a green hydrogen economy happens, essentially? So with that also, what financial strategies are in place to enhance lifelong learning and flexible pathways to engender this idea of transversal skills?
Thanks, Francois. That's quite a mouthful, because the concepts in the question are so rich, so it's difficult to to answer it in one line, kind of thing. and specifically around the funding or the financing or the way government, so when you say treasury, you actually mean government funding of these kinds of initiatives. And government funding at the moment is very linear, if you like. So there's money that comes from the two key sources, money that comes from the fiscus, which is allocated through higher education and training, and then goes into both the TVET sector, universities, and community education and training colleges. And I'll speak a little bit about them, particularly around your lifelong learning issue in a minute. And then there's the skills development levy that funds through the National Skills Fund and the SETA's specific skills development initiatives. And there should be space for a lot of innovation in particularly the latter, the skills development levy funding mechanisms. Whether that is being used to the extent possible is I suppose, debatable. I imagine not. That it's not being used to the extent that it could be to fund particularly innovative initiatives, forward-thinking initiatives. The SETAs, I think, was mentioned earlier, operate very much in a silo way. And in that way, they miss the transversal links that should be happening around skills development and around, I think, even the way we should think about planning, the way we should think about looking at what we need to do in terms of what's happening in the future. So I think in terms of the funding for those kinds of initiatives, it's very much, in my view anyway, from government side, very much in the skills levy sector, the entities funded from the skills levy, that is where a lot of the innovation and so on lies. The money that comes through the fiscus more directly through the Department of Higher Education and Training, it's certainly very difficult to use that funding on a broad scale for the kind of innovation and experimentation that this forward thinking requires. And that essentially then funds sort of the broader base. And those are the areas where, as you pointed out, they're very difficult to turn around, to change. When you find that there's a need for curriculum change, or it's not meeting the objectives today any longer, and they plan for a future tomorrow. We just heard here the future was planning to train all these people for the solar panels, and now we've transition to something else. Now, if you set up your curriculum in that way, it's become, those changes become difficult and hard. And so, of course, that's a challenge for the curriculum planners, because that's the world we're in today. So curriculum planners need to also start thinking about using your terms in their planning and thinking. So that it takes into account this rapidly changing space. And that is the kind of thing that enhances this workforce resilience that you spoke about. A little bit more about that. So particularly in this TVET space, the workforce of the people trained in that space often are trained for something very narrow and specific. And the problem, I guess, with that is that when things change, if their skills development or training was so narrow and specific, they're unable to pivot into the new, whatever the new thing is, or even just slightly different from what they've been trained to do. And so that means that the training needs to be different. It does need to be, it needs to you point that out in your paper as well. It needs to train people to to be able to take on other skills. So you get a base, and from that base, but part of the training is that you will be able to add on to this base. It's almost like a piece of Lego that you're building. So you're able to add on as things change, but that must be part of the training that you get. And that it's not just this narrow skill that you need, although of course you do need, that's why you're at a vocational training college as well. So let me stop there and maybe pick up on the lifelong learning a little bit later if there's time, but let me just stop there for now.
No, that's
Thanks.
perfect. Thank you. See, everybody, as I told you, very insightful. And Mr. January, if you ever like decide on a different career, become a lecturer, because Spencer, like you explain difficult concepts just so clearly, and yeah, you make it very easily accessible. I'm going to hand you over to Letitia, and if there's a little bit of time, we can go into lifelong learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spencer. Yeah, I think this is also, I think you raised your hand for all the loaded questions today. So given South Africa's education landscape, where there's a strong focus on TVET colleges to alleviate the persistent unemployment crisis, especially among the youth, what do you believe is needed to achieve meaningful educational inclusion?
Yeah, yes. As you said, Letitia, the very difficult, meaningful educational inclusion is quite a tough one, and I think that you pick up on some of the issues here that maybe we think of TVET colleges a little bit too narrowly, that it's something that is just for work. And prepare people just for work, and not more broadly, as you outline some of the other elements there. I don't know if I necessarily, well, clearly there's a need for some of those other life skills, if you want to, for want of a better word to call them. I think that is specifically the role of basic education, and that in basic education, we must focus a lot more on those other elements. I think there's a tendency at the moment for basic education also to start pivoting to work and occupational stuff, and less so on these other elements that are important for this meaningful educational a journey, if you like, of students as they come through the educational experience. But I think where that is lacking, and we find that perhaps in the youth today, that there is a need for this broader educational experience, aside from just the narrow skills training. And that's why I guess you know that is needed for the inclusion, for meaningful educational inclusion, as you put it. It's a nice term, for that to apply to TVET graduates as well. Included there, and I mean, you talk about the reliance that we're putting on TVET colleges to resolve our unemployment issues. And part of the problem there, I guess, just off the top of my head, the first thing that comes to mind really is the challenges about the quality of the outputs of the TVET colleges. The people in industry who question the ability of the TVET graduates, and as a result, you know, that almost determines the demand or slows down the demand. We've had in the TVET college sector a slowdown of enrollment over the past 5 years. Both, and I mean, in this context of massive youth unemployment, that is surprising. You know, why aren't youngsters going to TVET colleges? And that maybe is an indication that they don't value what they get from there. And that speaks to the quality of the services and of the qualifications. Which talks to one of your other points, is this collaboration between industry and the TVET college to ensure that what is being taught there is not only of high quality, but is relevant, is what is needed, is what they seek, the kind of skills that they seek. And so that begins to also speak to, helping to address this unemployment as we see more TVET colleges, TVET college graduates being in demand in industry. You'll see the demand pick up, or I hope so anyway. You see the demand pick up, and that will begin to address some of that unemployment that we see. But also, I guess, this educational inclusion starts to improve as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Our last panelist question. In your opinion, what do you believe are the immediate actions the green hydrogen economy should take as a starting point towards achieving a well-being economy?
That's a difficult one. I don't think I know enough about the green hydrogen economy and its role more broadly. I think just from what I do know, the fact that it is a part of this just energy transition that we seek. I think that in that energy transition, the justness is critical. It's going to be very difficult. I think that to get workers who are embedded in a system where the energy provision is not green, it requires perhaps a considerably different set of skills. And so we do need to think about some innovative ways. You've presented some of them here that will help to bring about that the justness in that energy transition. I think it is something that we need to pursue as a world, as a country as well. And that justness, we mustn't forget about that as we make the transition to a greener energy space. Thanks.
I think maybe just a round of applause to our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Spencer, I am going to take you up on lifelong learning, speaking about that at some point. At this stage, unfortunately, we're going to move on. We're now getting to the question and answer session, just people in the room and then also online. My super bright colleague, Luanda, has been monitoring the chat, so she will pose any questions that are typed in the chats. But if anybody in the room has a question, you can just let me know, and if I can't answer it, I will point you to the right person to answer it, and then we take it from there. Sorry, the microphone is on its way.
Good afternoon, colleagues, everyone else. I think we can easily call each other colleagues because we're all working in the same kind of space. You know, my biggest worry is the issue of working in silos. We hear that statement everywhere. Doesn't matter whether it's a conference, whether it's a presidential sitting, whether it's whoever. We're always talking about working in silos. What are we doing to make sure that we work together? Because unemployment rate is rising every day. We get more and more people that are unemployed because we're working in silos. Everyone wants to have a cherry on top in terms of programs or projects that we're implementing on your own without integrating the services, whether from private sector, public, parastatal, organization, anybody, even academics, because academics like to talk about that the most. But what is the solution to make sure that people work together? How do we get people to work? What are the suggestions that are out there? Do we have to come up with a legislation that says you cannot implement the program on your own? You have to utilize other departments, because I'm sure Spencer will say there's no money. There's no money, so you cannot do this, you cannot do that. But I'm sure if we can put that money or those monies, for a lack of better, like how I can put it, how do we put in all the budgets that we have, that we put together and say we're doing it for skills development in order for people to be employable? Because there's many people that are actually getting retrenched. That's why most of them need to be reskilled in order to get into industries that can allow them, where the previous industries probably have actually gone belly up, so they cannot go back there. How do we get to work together? That's my biggest problem. Doesn't matter what, we can go everywhere, but you will see that if we don't work together, we can never implement anything fruitfully to skill our nation and to get them employable at the end of it. Thank you.
It makes my heart so happy to see you in the room. So Lulu was part of the workshop as well, and she had just as many really, really good and key questions when she was part of the workshop. Mr. Lunka, if you want to ask your question, then we can move on.
Yes, no, thank you very much. I think I've just glanced on the documents, a good piece of work, I must say.
Yeah.
Well done. But the questions that I have is there are quite a number of structures that you are proposing in your recommendation. And I'm not sure about the alignment of those structures, like your foresight and your advisory board. How do these structures align to each other so that we avoid what Lulu is talking about? Now, the other question that I have is that there are quite a number of entities or institutions that you are making recommendation that they should lead certain committees or tasks. To what extent have you consulted those? Are they aware? Like I see DHET, the centrality of DHET in some of the work that you are mentioning. I mean, for us to discuss issues of TVET colleges, I'm not sure if then there's anyone online that is still coming from DHET. Perhaps that could be some exercise in futility, because people who are involved in this kind of work have to be in the room so that they are part of the discussion, so that we hear their voice.
Okay.
So as the HRDC, we're not implementing anything. We're not implementers. I think I must hasten to add, because it's not the mandate of the HRDC to implement or anything, because there are government departments that are responsible to be running certain activities. But we do come in as an apex body where there are blockages that have been identified. If then there are two departments that are unable to talk to each other, then I think we come in. That's why we're very much interested, because our role starts from the crave up to the grave. And we are interested in the entire skills ecosystem.
Yes.
So that's our responsibility. So yeah, that's all.
I'm going to answer you first, and then I'll answer Lulu, and then we can move on. So, Mr. Lumka, yes, sorry. I can bring this one, I think, to you.
Thank you. So we've got two questions from online. Njeri Mogiru asks, in some European countries, example Switzerland, students are allocated to higher education institutions type depending on their specific strengths, skills, and competencies, evident and demonstrated during high school. Students are therefore allocated to vocational institutions or universities or professional schools. Does the panel think this kind of allocation model for students might work in SA? I suppose that's the question for all the panelists. The second question is, thank you for the presentation and the discussions. Do we have South Africa TVET colleges accredited to offer green hydrogen economy qualifications? What are these qualifications and who accredited these colleges? I suppose that question can perhaps be answered by Devansha because it speaks to accreditation. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to answer the two questions in the corner and then I'll take it over to the speakers from there. Just Mr. Lumka, firstly, your interview that we did as part of this consultation was so insightful because, as I said to you, the HRDC does not have an easy job. Everybody's looking to you to implement everything, and you're not actually an implementation body. So I urge everyone to read the documents quite thoroughly because when we mention the HRDC, we specifically mention you as sort of a more facilitation and more negotiation role than anything else. So if we say something is in the DHET or the DSI, etc., we will put you as an auxiliary measure in terms of bridging that gap, essentially. And it was all thanks to you in terms of pointing that out. So thank you so much for that. With regards to the consultations, we consulted quite widely and we consulted quite in depth with regards to DHET as well. Miss Aruna Singh, is super insightful just in terms of giving her feedback on it as well. So every partner mentioned we did speak to. Unfortunately, the DHET representative couldn't make it today. So that's unfortunate just in the room, but we really ensured that anybody mentioned, as Dion mentioned earlier, there were 60 different stakeholders that we consulted on this project. And I think you were the last one. So you gave the most insightful information just in terms of bridging the gaps. Then with regards to just Lulu's question, in terms of working in silos, again, we go into quite detail in the documents about that, because in the room, that came through constantly with our research, that it's this idea of everybody speaking about green hydrogen, everybody speaking about TVET. As soon as I started doing the lit review for this project in December, I was completely floored by how much information there is out there, and it seems nobody's speaking to each other necessarily. The JET implementation plan also makes mention of the fact that there's no cohesion essentially between what's happening. So we advocate for the idea of, firstly, just as a Foresight futures practitioner, I know what happens when people start thinking about the future. And not necessarily in a negative way, but in a positive way. People start getting excited and they start speaking a similar, if not the same language, which is really good at breaking down those silos. In the 3-day workshop that we did, that became very clear as well. So with that in mind, you will note that every one of the skills Foresight specifically recommendations speaks to that. We speak with transversal skills that a cross-sectoral body needs to be established. So we bring private sector into the room, treasury, etc., as many people as possible to start thinking cohesively and also in a structured manner about where do we want to go. And from that, you can start building a positive feedback loop that takes that information, builds it back in, it feeds back in, and ideally we can bridge the gap between the silos with that. Then just in terms of accreditation, I don't know, Devaksha, if you want to add something to that. I mean, from my side, I know about the EWCETAs. I know there's quite a few different CETAs working on short courses specifically with regards to green hydrogen. There's not a course in green hydrogen per se that I know about, but you can speak more to it if you know about anything.
Yeah, so the EWCETA is driving that, but there's also CETA, who's also involved from the CETA's perspective that's up. And yet again, they're not talking to each other. So the courses that have been developed are not complementary to what skills are actually required out there. So there's a number of short courses. There's courses from UCT and University of Pretoria, but the TVET colleges are not involved directly in the expedition of those courses. So that's what's happened at the moment. But there is courses out there. Whether those are the skills that are actually needed or not, we'd have to see. But I personally think that they're not looking at the complementary courses that contribute to that hydrogen system itself and the running of it.
Yes.
So
yeah, and that's sort of, I think it's the third one in my document that we make specific mention of, that we actually list all of these different short courses and just speak to them and say, listen, there's attention needed here.
Yeah.
Letitia?
I just want to add some answers to some of the questions, especially Lulu. The whole point of working together, so not covered in this research, but there's some very recent research by Harvard Business Review about people working across silos.
and it's been proven that people who work across silos actually end up with more burnout and more stress than people who work in an isolated way. And my interpretation of that is that we're very good at doing our own things, but we're not that good at working collaboratively. And in there lies the work that we need to do in terms of how do we work better across silos. And I don't think there's a quick answer to that. I think that the research points to the fact that we need, as human beings, we need to do a lot more work in terms of being able to work better, to work across silos. Also, I think we talk about pockets of the future and the present. And we spoke about these incubators and innovation hubs. And that has started. I think there's about 23 or 25 of those already in place in various TVET colleges. And I think the key is to look at those and really go and start to work with that and see what's working, what's not working, and really just start with that. And I think thirdly, to address this whole siloed approach, is that I think slowly but surely we are democratizing strategic foresight, which is the future doesn't have to happen to me, but I can actually change things through my actions today so that I can get a better outcome. And for that reason, we do those workshops with different people coming from either TVET or the private sector or public sector, so that you can apply yourself when you go back to your specific area and really be that change. And I think we all agree that these topics are very complex and there's not a premeditated answer. So it's going to take some work and also new approaches in terms of getting there. I just want to, I think just to add on, I think we've consulted quite broadly, but as you know that you can never quite finish talking to everybody. And in there, there's other projects where one can, build an online platform and get people to start contributing their ideas and, this could work with or that could not work. And I think maybe that's something that we could also start looking at just to make collaboration more accessible. So that's my.
No wonder there's one final question that I know we're missing. Can you just repeat it for me, please?
Sure. It was about looking at how the European countries kind of do it in terms of allocating people to specific schools and colleges based on their skills and capabilities. Could this work in a South African context?
Look, I definitely think we have more qualified people to speak to that, so let's just pass it on.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Asi Pezingelwa, and I'm from the DSI HSRC internship program. And in response to that, the internship program is actually placing graduates in all different host institutions across the country in the science, engineering, technology, as well as human and social sciences disciplines. And currently the program is including graduates at NQF level 7 to 9, but we are in conversations with DHET through the National Skills Fund in introducing also the inclusion of NQF level 6. So that's part of what we do. And I think I've found quite huge resonance with the work that's coming out of this research that speaks to basically the principles and the key designs of the internship program. So the program itself focuses on placing the interns in host institutions that are within their qualifications. So they get training, and then there's a component of capacity development that they also go through in the 2 years that they are with the program, which speaks to the transversal skills. Right. So we're basically looking at building a holistic individual that will then transition into the labor market through that program. And the inclusion of TVET colleges is one area that we are now getting into. And I think being part of the conversations in this room today has opened my eyes to a lot of points that we can discuss then in collaboration. But we also then partnered with GIZ, where they are funding 10 female graduates within the hydrogen space. And that is one project where we've gone into partnerships with in actually looking at focusing on skills development in specific areas. And some of the work that we're doing now is looking for partnerships for other scarce skills or areas of interest, particularly for the Department of Science and Innovation, but also other sectors as well that are key for the labor market in the country. Thank you.
Amazing. That, yeah, as Letitia said, you can never consult widely enough. We did speak to the HSRC and your colleague was super insightful, and we're excited about the idea. I know you're bringing in foresight work, etc., but then you bring a different angle to it. So that's the thing, like the research is never done. So thank you so much for that feedback. Luanda, any more questions? Oh, okay. Please, Spencer.
Okay, just coming back to that question about the allocation of students to qualifications, either at TVET level or university, or I think he also said professional colleges in Switzerland based on the aptitude. So we know that the Swiss vocational system is very strong, and there are a whole range of reasons for that. I think this is maybe but one of them, but there are a whole range of others that I think are maybe stronger even, including things like a very strong partnership between industry and the education sector, particularly around the vocational educational sector. That maybe that link is what makes the systems in Switzerland and Austria very strong, the vocational systems anyway. I think that the linking of students based on their aptitude and assigning them to a qualification at that point is also very risky. You know, that it takes away choice and agency of individuals, and maybe there's that's not really the reason for the strength of their system, that it lies somewhere else. But there are strong systems. There are things we can learn from them. I don't think that assigning students based on their aptitude that they show at school level to either a degree or a professional college or TVET is necessarily the answer, though. Thanks.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. And I remember you mentioned it in our interview with you as well, just in terms of the importance of contextual specificity. Just everybody mentions the German, the Swiss, etc., and they are wonderful things to learn, but we need to be very aware of what's happening here. And both PBs are specifically developed with the idea of speaking to what's happening in South Africa now, and through a futures lens, but looking at what happens now and what could happen. So thank you so much for that.
Francois, and perhaps this could be, okay, so can I just read out the one that's online and then I'll pass along the microphone?
Then that will be the last one.
Yes.
It's fine.
I think we can accommodate another
Yes,
question.
yeah.
So Bongiwetu Online says, good afternoon. Thank you for all your informative and insightful presentations. Can you please advise on the role and relevance of the South Africa Institute of Vocational and Continuing Education and Training, which was/is meant to be providing support to TVETs in South Africa?
Do you want to answer?
No, I want to know if anybody from the panelists wants to go for that. I'm going to be honest with you, my knowledge is quite limited on that, so I can't.
Thank you so much. And again, also from my side, congratulations. I really, really like what I've seen and what has come out. And I specifically want to pick up on the universal basic dividend. And this is maybe not so much a question, but a concern or a comment that comes out. So, and stop me if I go on too long, but if if you look at what happened in South Africa with the Renewable Energy Procurement Program, the REI4P, and although you can say many wrong things about it, and there were good and bad things that happened, and research pointed that out, but the South African government could impose all those requirements like skills development, local economic development, socio-economic development, because the program was centrally run. And this is not the case in the green hydrogen economy. So this is purely a public sector development initiative. Now, on the one hand, you will have requirements from export markets that might put requirements like sustainability and things like that on the projects. And then on the other hand, you have the EIA process, the environmental impact assessment process in South Africa. But somewhere in between, if we go, and I really like this universal, I have to look at a basic dividend. This is brilliant, but how are we, and I want to link to a previous comment, how do we ensure this happens in this green hydrogen sector? And I think sometimes people portray private sector as purely extractionist. I don't always agree with that. I think private sector always, or not, also recognize the need for license to operate and things like that. But in the absence of the central government procurement or the ability of government to make rules or requirements for the sector, that worries me. And I would like to extend this request to government to think, how could they step into that role? Because I think that's one way of safeguarding common goods like water and like land and things like that. So yeah, so that's a concern of mine. And then to bring that back to skills, and what I do also think is that I love the title, planning skills for a training in uncertainty. But we do see now a lot of information coming out, the DHET report that was launched a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's initiatives like these that will bring the puzzle pieces together. And I also love your comment that people suffer from burnout. So, and that's typically a role that GIZ could play, is bring in diverse stakeholders and diverse role players. But yeah, sorry, no question, just a comment and concerns. But thank you for good research, and we will study it and see how we can contribute. Thanks. I am from GIZ, sorry, but it's a different program. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think the universal basic dividend, it sparks something within us because it's different, right? It's a new concept, and it's how is this going to work? Where's the funding going to come from, etc. But I think we need to think a bit broader, and like we said earlier, we're positioning for economic well-being. So we're moving beyond. We want to move beyond just jobs and beyond private sector making profits. I think if one looks at just the JSE, and if you look at, how all the profits that have been made, and if you look a bit further and you look, well, where did this money go to? It's a small part is actually left for the communities. And we're saying that, there's lots of policies in place to really support economic growth and to support this just transition. But if we are true to economic well-being, and if we are true to the well-being of the communities in which we serve, then we need to look at something bigger. And that something bigger can take different shapes. So if you say we're going to get the community to be part of this universal basic dividend. So, I mean, if you get a dividend from stocks in an organization, in a private company, you are interested in that company. You are interested in the environmental impacts. You're interested in the profits. And by doing so, you now have a voice because you are interested, because you will also reap the benefits thereof. And in effect, that's what we are advocating for, is we initially with Pumla, we said we'll have a policy brief for the private sector and we'll have one for the public sector. But then we realized that the interconnections are just so great, we actually can't divorce the two. And I think the interconnections will grow even further and include communities. I think it was Boitumelo who said that, the graduates come from communities and they influence communities and communities influence them. So our interconnection in which we find ourselves will just continue to grow. And I personally like universal basic dividend because it creates the space for community voices to be part of this conversation. I mean, we also speak about inclusion and leaving nobody behind, but we know the unemployment rates and we have to try something new. So it's not a be all and end all. It's a position on the table. And I think rightly so, it does need further research. One would now have to go and do the policy assessment impacts and the analysis thereof, and really look at how does one still make this attractive for foreign investment, but also how do you then, bring your communities closer so that they are part of the dividend makeup. So not a easy point to make or easy question, but I think it extends itself to stretch ourselves, to think a little bit beyond profit and loss and margin, and to think, well, how do we look at the other needs of communities that we need to serve?
Thanks, Letitia, and thanks, Marlette. With regards to the online question, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Pippa to just get the details, and I know there's not anyone specifically in the room who can speak to the softer question, but I will point you in the right direction. What I'm going to do now, thank you so much for everyone for listening, for taking part, for, just being here. I'm going to hand you over to Luanda to just do a quick wrap up for us. And then we've got Mo just from GIZ to do a final hi and bye. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francois. I think I've yielded the time for the summary for the engagement, which was very robust. And I think this conversation needs no summary. It's been so robust. We've all been very, very much engaged. I think mine is maybe to just highlight that the two publications that were presented here today are now available on the SAIA website. The first publication is entitled Training in Uncertainty, Skills Foresights for a Just Green Hydrogen Uncertainty. The second one is Skills Governance and the TVET Ecosystem, Pioneering Systemic Innovations for the Emerging Green Hydrogen Economy. Again, these are now available on the SAIA website. Dion, in the beginning of his interventions, began by thanking all the partners, and I'd like to just echo that thank you as we draw to a close. I think it's been an illuminating discussion. It's been a necessary one. It's been one that really has made very important linkages, and we hope this is the beginning of many other conversations that will ensue in the future. So we now have Mohammed Peterson, who will have the last word. But before he takes the floor, I'd really love to also to ask you to join me in giving a round of applause to our Futures program, Dion, Francois, Letitia, and Karabo in her absence. Mohammed Peterson, Technical Advisor for the Development for Employment Project at GIZ. The floor is yours for the final word and closure. Thank you.
Thank you. New specs, I'm still trying to get used to them. When you hit, the big numbers and then you start getting multiple focal points on your specs. I want to thank you guys for the wonderful work that you've done, the wonderful research that you've done. I'm not allowed to ask, am I allowed to ask questions while I'm doing? Of course, okay. Wait for it. I want to thank Pumla and UNDP for what they've done. I want to thank our colleague from the Green Hydrogen Project at GIZ. I'm sure you are going to get involved in this at some point very soon. I'd just like to bring up a few things that were mentioned during the day. One of the first things that jumped out at me was someone mentioned we mustn't forget the just part of just energy transition. But we must also not forget that it's not only just energy transition, it's just transition across the board. So and quite often I sit in meetings and forums like this, and people tend to sort of just automatically go towards the energy side of things. It's not always that. it's waste, it's efficiency. There's many, many other ways of decarbonizing our economy that doesn't necessarily have to do with green energy. So like we shouldn't forget just, we shouldn't overemphasize energy either. Collaboration, that's been a big point across a lot of what we do. And it is immensely important that we really do get those partnerships in place. We were talking about partnerships, especially between industry and academia. That's always been a tough one across the board. I remember I used to work in the automotive sector. We had a quick meeting, I think it was a couple of hours, a workshop with the training managers of all the assemblers. So we had Ford there, we had BMW there, Nissan there. We had a couple of guys from government, THET, and we had a few people from the TVET colleges. Within 2 hours, the first thing we came up with was lecturer development is a requirement at the colleges. And everybody was in agreement, and we actually started developing a program for lecturers development in the automotive sector. So it just shows you the importance of collaboration. This project itself, I think this is now the third time Pumla and I sort of have worked together, or maybe not worked together, but we've engaged about projects. The first one, I think we were too slow. The second one, we just finished up in March. And this is now the third time that the two of us are working together on just expanding what we want to do. We've got the same, and this is what we were talking about, talking to each other. We've got the same objectives. We've got the same outcomes. Why not pool our resources and actually do better than what we actually started wanting to do? There was another couple of things I wanted to say. The one thing that came to mind was, are we talking to the right people? Everybody here is relatively knowledgeable about green hydrogen or the just energy transition or just transition. Who are the people that we really need to speak to? Just to give you an example, one of the outputs that we've got running now with our current project is actually doing capacity development for trainers to actually tell them what is just transition. We're going down to a level where we're talking about it, but do the people, and I think that point did come up, do the people that are actually at the face, do they know what we're talking about? Do they know how to take these concepts and deliver them to a class full of 17, 18, 19-year-old students? We don't know. And this is what we need to do. I'm speaking too much. Once again, I want to thank everybody for your presence. I know we have to all slip back in traffic now, but thank you to everybody and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Colleagues, just to let you know that we do have a very brief cocktail reception outside. If you could please join us before we all dive back into traffic. Thank you.